The day of the final council meeting arrived. The Grand Chamber was filled with leaders from Virella and representatives from the Human Alliance. The tension was almost tangible, but there was also a quiet hope hanging in the air. Princess Allura stood at the center, her silver-threaded hair gleaming under the crystal dome. David stood beside her, calm and steady, ready to speak for peace one last time. The council opened with heated discussions. Some members remained doubtful, reminding others of past conflicts and mistrust. But Allura raised her hand, and silence fell. "We have seen courage," she said. "We have seen sacrifice. David's actions have shown us that peace is not only possible, it is necessary." She turned to David. "You have earned your place here. Speak now." David stepped forward. His voice was clear and strong as he addressed everyone. "Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the choice to find understanding despite it. We come from different worlds, but we share the same hopes. A safe future for our children, a chance to grow and learn together." He looked around the room. "I know there are still fears and doubts. That is natural, but we must not let fear control us. We have the chance to choose a new path." The council listened quietly. The longer David spoke, the more calm the room became. His words reached beyond politics and strategy. They touched something deeper. After he finished, Princess Allura nodded. "Let this day mark the beginning of a new alliance between our peoples." A vote was called. The councilors rose one by one, their voices echoing through the chamber. Slowly, the decision was made to accept the peace treaty. Outside, the city celebrated. The twin suns shone brightly over Virella, and the streets filled with music and joy. David and Allura stood together on the palace balcony, watching the festivities. "We did it," David said softly. Allura smiled, her eyes shining. "You showed us that courage and kindness can change even the hardest hearts." David looked out over the city. "This is only the beginning." Allura nodded. "But it is a strong beginning, built on trust and respect." The night sky filled with stars, and for the first time in a long while, two worlds felt united in hope. The silver shuttle cut through the pale clouds above Korath Prime and descended toward the capital city. Dane sat by the window, eyes fixed on the strange beauty below. Towers of smooth black stone rose like giant spears, each one carved with glowing lines that pulsed gently. Between them ran wide avenues filled with streams of hovercraft. It was unlike any place he had seen before. Dane was a human diplomat from Earth, sent to attend the Korath Peace Summit. His mission was simple: strengthen trade relations, avoid offending anyone important, and represent humanity as a trustworthy ally in the growing web of interstellar politics. He had been to alien worlds before, but Korath was different. It was older, prouder, and wrapped in layers of tradition that outsiders barely understood. When the shuttle landed at the spaceport, a tall Korath official in a dark green robe greeted him. The alien's skin was a deep shade of copper, and his eyes shone like polished glass. "Ambassador Dane of Earth," he said, bowing slightly. "Welcome to Korath Prime. I am Varric. The summit begins tomorrow, but the High Council invites you to tour the city today." Dane thanked him and followed toward a waiting transport. The vehicle glided silently above the ground, carrying them toward the heart of the city. As they passed, Dane noticed how clean and orderly everything seemed, even the smallest market. Stalls were arranged with perfect symmetry, and every building looked like it had been designed with care centuries ago. The transport stopped at a large open plaza filled with people from many worlds. The smell of alien spices hung in the air. Crystal lanterns floated overhead, swaying gently in the wind. Vendors called out in different languages, showing their goods to visitors. Varric explained that this was the great market of Korath, a place where cultures met and traded freely. As Dane walked through the market, he kept his diplomatic smile in place. He greeted merchants, sampled small pieces of strange fruit, and admired the craftsmanship of alien jewelry. But then something shifted in the atmosphere. Conversations around him grew quieter. People turned their heads toward the same direction. Down the main street, a column of armored guards marched forward. In their center walked a young woman unlike anyone Dane had ever seen. She was tall for her kind, her silver-blue skin smooth like polished stone, her hair a deep shade of midnight. She wore a simple but elegant white garment trimmed with gold patterns. Even without knowing her name, Dane could see she was someone important. Varric leaned closer and spoke quietly. "That is Princess Mira, daughter of King Thalen. She is next, in line for the Korath throne." Dane noticed something else. Though the crowd watched her with respect, there was tension in their eyes. The guards kept a tight formation, and Mira's expression was calm but distant. It was not the look of someone enjoying a public walk. A pair of older Korath women nearby whispered to each other. Dane could not catch every word, but one phrase stood out in the translator's feed. "The trial begins soon." Trial. The word caught Dane off guard. He knew nothing about any royal trial. When he asked Varric, the official gave a polite but evasive answer. "It is an internal matter of the royal court. The High Council will address it." Then he quickly changed the subject and guided Dane toward another street. Still, Dane's mind stayed on the princess. She walked with grace. But there was something guarded in her movements, as if she knew many eyes were watching for a mistake. He wondered what kind of trial could involve someone of her rank and why the king would allow it. Later that evening, Dane was escorted to the diplomatic quarters. The rooms were spacious, with large windows looking out over the glowing city. As he sat at the table reviewing his notes for the summit, he heard soft music drifting up from the streets below. He tried to focus on his duties, but the image of Princess Mira walking under heavy guard stayed in his thoughts. Dane decided to step onto the balcony for some air. The city stretched out before him, lights shining like scattered stars. Somewhere, in the distance, a bell tower chimed 3 times. He knew tomorrow would be filled with speeches and formal agreements, but something told him there was more going on beneath the surface. His communicator beeped softly. It was a message from a fellow Earth diplomat stationed on Korath months earlier. The text was short but direct. "Keep your eyes open. Council factions are moving against the throne. The princess is at the center of it." Dane stared at the message, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders. Politics was nothing new to him. But this was different. In interstellar diplomacy, royal, disputes could spiral into wars, and wars could draw entire worlds into conflict. From the plaza far below, he heard a faint sound, the distant rumble of a crowd. Looking down, he saw groups of citizens gathering in the torchlit streets, speaking in urgent tones. The air seemed charged with expectation, as if the entire city knew something important was about to happen. The next morning, Dane rose early. He dressed in his formal suit and prepared for the opening of the Peace Summit, but even as he did, his thoughts drifted to the princess again. He did not know her story or the full reason for her guarded walk through the market, but he sensed that her fate might become tied to his own mission. And somewhere in the grand palace of Korath Prime, Princess Mira was preparing for a trial that could change not only her life, but the balance of power across the stars. The morning sun over Korath Prime was pale and cold, casting long shadows across the marble steps of the High Council Hall. Dane walked with measured steps toward the summit chamber, his thoughts still clouded by the message he had received the night before. He had attended many diplomatic events in his career, but this one felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air, the kind that made people speak in lower voices and glance over their shoulders. Inside the chamber, delegates from many worlds sat in a great circle. They wore robes, armor, or simple suits depending on their culture. At the center stood a raised platform for speeches. Banners hung from the walls, each bearing the mark of a participating world. The king of Korath was not present, but his seat was marked with a golden crest. As the summit began, Dane tried to focus on the discussions about trade routes and defense agreements. Yet every time he looked toward the section reserved for Korath's representatives, he noticed that the princess's chair was empty. He told himself that it was not unusual for royalty to skip certain meetings, but his instincts told him something else was happening. An hour into the session, the tall doors of the chamber swung open. 2 armored guards entered, escorting Princess Mira between them. She was not dressed in royal attire. Instead, she wore a plain silver tunic without the gold patterns from yesterday. Her wrists were bound with a faintly glowing restraint band. The sight made the entire room fall silent. The presiding counselor, a stern Korath elder named Sareth, stood and addressed the assembly. "Let it be known that Princess Mira is accused of violating the royal accord. She shall be tried before the High Council in 2 days' time." Dane felt a stir of disbelief. The royal accord was an ancient agreement between the ruling family and the council, the foundation of Korath's political order. For someone of Mira's position to be accused of breaking it was unheard of. He quickly noticed that King Thalin was still absent. His seat remained empty, the golden crest untouched. The counselor continued. "Until the trial, the princess will be held under guard in the Tower of Judgment. The charges against her are serious and will be heard in full before the court." Mira's expression remained calm, though her eyes scanned the chamber briefly. For a moment, they met Dane's. It was a brief, searching look, as if she were silently asking whether he understood what was happening. He did not yet, but he knew this was not a simple matter of law. The guards turned to escort her out. As they passed, Dane noticed something small, the faintest shake of her head, as though warning him to stay away. Yet, in his experience, such warnings usually meant the opposite, that someone hoped for help but could not ask openly. The rest of the summit session continued, but Dane barely heard the speeches. His mind was on what he had just witnessed. The princess's arrest had been public enough to make the entire chamber take notice, yet the absence of the king spoke volumes. Either he could not or would not intervene. When the session ended, Dane approached Varric, the official who had greeted him yesterday. "What exactly is the charge against Princess Mira?" he asked. Varric hesitated. "The matter is sensitive. Ambassador, some say she refused to sign an amendment to the royal accord. Others claim she acted against the interests of the council. The details are for the court to reveal." "That's vague," Dane said, "and you know it." Varric's eyes flicked toward 2 nearby guards, then back to Dane. "If you value your position here, you will not involve yourself in Korath's internal disputes." His voice dropped lower. "But if you truly wish to understand, ask who stands to gain if the princess is found guilty." That single sentence told Dane everything he needed to know. This was not about law, but about power. Later that day, Dane left the safety of the diplomatic quarter and made his way toward the old library of the city. The Korath people kept records going back thousands of years, much of it stored in public archives. With the help of his translator device, he began searching for mentions of the royal accord and any past trials involving royalty. What he found was telling. In the entire history of the accord, no direct heir to the throne had ever been brought to trial. While reading, Dane overheard 2 young scholars talking nearby. They spoke of a proposed treaty with a neighboring empire known for its harsh rule. The treaty, they said, would give the empire control over several Korath colonies. Dane guessed that this might be the amendment Mira had refused to sign. If so, her trial was likely an attempt to remove her as an obstacle. As he left the library, Dane walked through narrow streets lit by dim crystal lamps. The air smelled faintly of smoke from the cooking fires of street vendors. In the distance, the Tower of Judgment rose against the night sky, tall, cold, and unyielding. He imagined Mira within its stone walls, awaiting a trial that would almost certainly be stacked against her. That night, back in his quarters, Dane received another message from his contact. This one was even shorter than before. Council majority already decided the verdict. Only outside intervention can change it. Dane leaned back in his chair, weighing his options. Officially, he had no right to interfere in the internal politics of another world. But unofficially, he was here as a representative of humanity. And humans had a habit of stepping into situations when they believed justice was being denied. He remembered the look in the princess's eyes when she had been led through the chamber. It was not the look of someone expecting to be saved, but of someone resigned to being abandoned. Dane decided he would at least learn the full truth before the trial began. He would speak to those who knew the princess, dig into the council's alliances, and find out who was pushing for her conviction. And if the only way to save her was to step beyond the safe limits of diplomacy, he would do so. The Tower of Judgment loomed in his thoughts as he closed his eyes to rest. In 2 days, it would be the stage for a trial that could decide the fate of Korath. And Dane knew that if he did nothing, it would also decide the kind of man he was willing to be. The next morning, Dane left the diplomatic quarter wearing a plain gray coat instead of his formal suit. He wanted to move through the city without drawing too much attention. His goal was clear: find proof of the real reason behind Princess Mira's arrest. The streets of Korath Prime were busy with merchants, workers, and travelers from other worlds. Towering stone buildings cast long shadows over the markets. Dane kept his head low as he made his way toward the lower districts, where whispers carried faster than official statements. His first stop was a small tea house run by a retired palace scribe named Wren. Dane had met Wren during a cultural exchange the year before. The old Korath man welcomed him quietly and led him to a table in the back, away from the main room. "I heard what happened," Wren said in a low voice as he poured a steaming cup. "The princess is in the Tower of Judgment." "Yes," Dane replied. "I need to know why, not the official version. The truth." Wren looked uneasy. "Truth is dangerous when the council fears it. Mira refused to sign an agreement with the Dravic Empire. The council promised the Empire control over our outer colonies in exchange for protection. She said the price was too high." Dane leaned forward. "And the king?" "The king is bound by old laws. The royal accord says that if the council brings formal charges against a member of the royal family, the king cannot interfere until the trial ends. This law was meant to keep the throne from abusing power, but now it is being used against his own daughter." Wren reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystal data shard. "This is a record of a private council meeting. It shows which members are working with the Dravic, but it is not complete. You will need more if you want the court to listen." Dane took the shard, hiding it inside his coat. "Then I will find the rest." Leaving the tea house, he made his way toward the old administrative quarter where public archives were stored. Most visitors came for trade records or historical maps, but Dane was looking for something more recent. The archives were guarded, but as an ambassador, he had clearance to enter. Inside, long shelves held thousands of crystal shards. The light was dim, and the air smelled faintly of metal and dust. Dane searched through the catalog until he found the section holding council session records from the past year. As he scanned, he noticed several gaps in the official timeline, missing sessions that should have been there. His instincts told him that those missing files were exactly what he needed. While he searched, a quiet voice spoke from behind him. "You're not looking for trade records, are you?" Dane turned to see a young Korath woman in archivist robes. Her eyes were sharp, and her tone carried both curiosity and caution. "I'm looking for truth," Dane said simply. She studied him for a moment before glancing toward the empty hallway. Follow me. The archivist led him through a narrow service corridor and into a small side room. From a locked case, she pulled out 2 shards wrapped in dark cloth. These were ordered removed from public view. I kept copies. They show the council discussing how to frame the princess for violating the accord. I do not trust them with such power. Dane accepted the shards. Why help me? Because if they can do this to her, they can do it to anyone, she replied. And I believe she is trying to protect our people. Dane left the archives with the shards hidden under his coat. He now had enough to suspect a full conspiracy, but he still needed solid proof linking the Dravic Empire to the plot. Without that, the council could claim this was only an internal political matter. His next lead came from a coded message sent by his contact. Dravic envoy meeting with council members tonight at the East Spire. The East Spire was an old tower overlooking the river, used mostly for private negotiations. If Dane could get close enough, he might overhear something useful. That night, dressed in dark clothing, he made his way there. The spire's outer walls were lined with sharp crystal points, but an old service bridge stretched across the river to a side entrance. Dane moved quietly, keeping to the shadows. Inside, he found a narrow passage that led to an upper balcony. Below him, in the grand meeting room, he saw 5 council members seated around a long table. Beside them stood a tall Dravic envoy, his scaled skin gleaming under the soft lights. "You have the trial secured?" the Dravic asked in a low but firm voice. "Yes," one counselor replied. "With the king bound by the accord, the verdict will go as planned. Once the princess is removed, we will sign the treaty, and your empire will have full access to our colonies." Dane's hands tightened into fists. He had heard enough to confirm everything Wren and the archivist had told him. He pulled out a small recorder from his coat and captured the rest of the conversation. When the meeting ended, he waited until the Dravic and the counselors had left. Only then did he slip out the way he came, careful to avoid the guards. Back in his quarters, Dane laid out the evidence on the table, Wren's shard, the secret council meeting shards from the archivist, and the recording from the East Spire. Together they painted a clear picture of the plot against Mira. He knew time was short. The trial was only a day away. If he tried to present this evidence in the Korath court, the council could simply dismiss it. He needed a place where the law was not in their hands. There was only one option: the Interstellar High Court, a neutral venue where even the most powerful rulers had to answer to the law. It would be a dangerous move. Taking a member of the royal family out of Korath before the trial could be seen as an act of interference. But Dane was certain that if Mira stayed, she would be found guilty no matter what the truth was. He sat in silence for a long moment, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere inside the Tower of Judgment, the princess was waiting for a trial she could not win. And somewhere deep inside himself, Dane knew he had already made his choice. Night settled over Korath Prime like a heavy curtain. The city lights glowed in soft colors, but the streets around the Tower of Judgment were dim and quiet. Dane stood in the shadow of an old stone wall, his eyes fixed on the towering structure ahead. He had studied its layout for hours, memorizing guard rotations and entry points. The tower was built to be intimidating. Its black stone walls were smooth and high with narrow slits for windows. A single bridge crossed the moat that surrounded it, guarded by 2 watchtowers. Inside, long corridors wound upward to the holding cells. Princess Mira was in the upper level, under constant watch. Dane checked the time on his wrist device. The guard rotation would change in 10 minutes, giving him a narrow chance to move. He adjusted the small satchel slung over his shoulder. Inside was the evidence he had collected: the crystal shards, the recording from the East Spire, and a portable holo projector to display it. If he succeeded, these items could save the princess's life. He moved quickly along the side wall until he reached the bridge's support beams. From here, an old maintenance tunnel ran beneath the moat. Few knew it existed, and fewer still dared to use it. Dane slipped inside, the damp stone walls closing around him. The sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnel as he climbed. The narrow steps leading up to the tower's lower levels. At the top, a rusted grate blocked the exit. He pushed it open slowly, careful not to make noise. Peering out, he saw an empty storage room filled with old furniture and supply crates. Perfect. He stepped out and closed the grate behind him. The corridors beyond were dimly lit by wall lanterns. Dane kept close to the shadows, his movements steady but quick. He had memorized the route from old blueprints, up 2 levels, then across the east wing to the secure cells. Halfway up the second stairwell, he heard the sound of boots. 2 guards were coming down. There was no time to hide in another room, so he pressed himself into a dark corner and waited. The guards passed by without noticing him, their voices low as they discussed the upcoming trial. Dane caught a few words. Verdict already decided, before they disappeared down the stairs. When he reached the east wing, he found the door to the secure cells guarded by a single sentry. The man stood stiff and alert, his hand resting near the hilt of a short energy blade. Dane stepped out from the shadows, holding up a small device. "This is a direct message from the High Council," Dane said in a firm tone. "It must be delivered to the prisoner at once." The guard frowned. "No messages are allowed." Dane pressed a button on the device, releasing a quick burst of blinding light. The guard stumbled back, shielding his eyes. Before the man could call for help, Dane slipped past him and entered the cell block. The corridor here was narrow, with reinforced doors lining both sides. At the far end, behind a heavy energy barrier, sat Princess Mira. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "Getting you out," Dane replied. "I have proof that the Council is working with the Dravic Empire, but we have to leave Korath if we want to use it." She shook her head. "You will be charged with interference. It will make things worse." "It's already as bad as it can be," he said. "If you stay, they will find you guilty no matter what the truth is. I can get you to the Interstellar High Court. There, they have no power to silence you." Mira stood, her expression changing from doubt to resolve. "Then let's go." Dane took a small control device from his pocket and disabled the energy barrier. The field flickered and vanished. He handed Mira a plain cloak to hide her royal attire. Together they moved quickly back through the corridor, slipping past the dazed guard who was still rubbing his eyes. They retraced Dane's path through the storage room and into the maintenance tunnel. The air was damp and cold, but the sound of the city above was a comfort. They were close to freedom. When they reached the far end of the tunnel, Dane helped Mira climb up into the alley beyond. The streets were quiet, but they could not risk the main roads. Dane led her through a series of narrow side streets lit only by small lanterns. From time to time, he glanced behind them. In the distance, he saw flickers of movement, shadows that seemed to follow. "They've noticed," Mira whispered. "Then we move faster," Dane said. They crossed an old stone bridge and entered the industrial quarter, where rows of silent factories stood in darkness. Somewhere ahead, a small shuttle waited, one Dane had arranged through a trusted contact. The shuttle's pilot, a wiry human named Lorne, was loyal and knew how to keep his mouth shut. But as they neared the docking platform, the sound of boots and metal echoed behind them. Guards! The shouts grew louder, and beams of searchlights swept across the streets. Dane grabbed Mira's hand and pulled her into a side passage between 2 factories. They moved quickly, ducking under pipes and stepping over crates. The docking platform came into view, a small craft waiting with its lights dimmed. Lorne stood by the ramp, waving them forward. "Hurry!" he called. The guards were close now. Dane and Mira sprinted the last few meters and rushed up the ramp. Lorne sealed the hatch and ran to the controls. The engines roared to life, and the shuttle lifted off just as the guards reached the platform. Energy bolts flashed past, striking the metal walls, but none hit the craft. As the shuttle climbed into the night sky, Mira let out a slow breath. "We made it." "Not yet," Dane said. "They'll send patrol ships after us." Lorne looked over his shoulder. "Then let's make this quick." He pushed the engines harder, guiding the shuttle into the upper atmosphere. The lights of the city faded below, replaced by the endless black of space. Dane sat beside Mira, the satchel of evidence between them. "Once we reach the neutral zone, we head straight for the Interstellar High Court. No one can touch you there." Mira looked at him with steady eyes. "You risked everything for someone you barely know." Dane gave a small smile. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone to see that what's happening to them is wrong." The shuttle broke free of Korath's gravity, stars stretching across the view ahead. Behind them, the planet grew smaller, but the danger was far from over. Dane knew the hardest part was still to come. They had escaped the tower. Now they had to survive the journey to the court, with an entire empire determined to stop them. The shuttle emerged from hyperspace into the wide orbit of the Interstellar High Court. The station was massive, shaped like a silver ring with a bright central hub. Hundreds of ships moved in and out of its docking bays, representing dozens of worlds. Here, the laws of any single planet did not matter. Only the laws of the unified charter applied. Lorne guided the shuttle toward an assigned docking port. Dane stood by the viewport, watching the station grow larger. Beside him, Princess Mira kept her cloak wrapped tightly around her. Her eyes were calm, but Dane could tell she was thinking about what would happen next. "Once we step inside, the court will protect you," Dane said. "But the council will send their lawyers. They'll try to twist the truth." "I understand," Mira replied. "We must be ready." The docking clamps locked onto the shuttle and the airlock opened. With a hiss, a group of court officials waited in pale blue uniforms, their silver badges marking them as members of the station's neutral security force. "Ambassador Dane, Princess Mira," one of them said in a clear voice. "You are under the protection of the Interstellar High Court. You will be escorted directly to the registration hall. The hearing will begin within 2 hours." As they walked through the station's wide corridors, Dane noticed the subtle signs of political tension. Delegates from different worlds whispered to one another. News drones hovered nearby, broadcasting live updates. Word of their arrival was already spreading. The registration process was quick. Mira's identity was confirmed, and the charges filed by the Korath Council were officially logged. Dane presented the satchel of evidence, which was sealed and sent to the court's review team. When they entered the grand courtroom, the scale of the place struck Dane. The chamber was a vast dome with tiered seating rising high along the walls. At the center stood a circular platform where the defense and prosecution would speak. Above it, a ring of judges' seats formed a complete circle, each one occupied by a representative of a different star system. On one side of the chamber, the delegation from Korath was already present. Counselor Sareth sat at their head, his expression cold. Behind him stood the tall, copper-skinned figure of King Thalen. The king's face was unreadable, but Dane noticed the way his hands gripped the railing in front of him. "Court officials," announced the case. "The Council of Korath versus Princess Mira of Korath. Charges: violation of the royal accord, willful obstruction of council authority." The prosecution, led by a senior Korath advocate, began their statement. They spoke of duty, tradition, and the importance of the royal accord. They claimed Mira had acted against the will of the council and endangered Korath's future security. When they finished, it was Dane's turn. He stepped forward with Mira beside him. His voice was steady but firm. "Honorable judges," he began, "this is not a case about the royal accord. This is a case about political betrayal. My client refused to sign a treaty that would have handed Korath's outer colonies to the Dravic Empire. For this, the council decided to remove her through false charges. Murmurs ran through the chamber. The Dravic Empire was known for aggressive expansion, and their name carried weight. Dane motioned for the court to display the first piece of evidence. The air shimmered, and the projection of a council meeting appeared above the platform. During the recording, council members openly discussed framing the princess. Their voices were clear, their words damning. Several judges leaned forward, their expressions sharp. The prosecution tried to object, claiming the recording was obtained unlawfully. But the presiding judge, a tall figure from the Saran system, waved them down. The court accepts all evidence relevant to the truth. Next, Dane presented the shard from Wren and the meeting logs from the archivist. Together, they formed a chain of proof showing that the Dravic had been in secret talks with the council for months. Finally, he played the recording from the east, Spire, where the Dravic envoy confirmed the plan in his own words. The reaction in the chamber was immediate. Several delegates spoke in hushed tones. Even the king's hands relaxed slightly on the railing, though he remained silent. When the prosecution took the floor again, they tried to shift the focus back to tradition and law, claiming that even if the treaty existed, Mira's refusal to follow the council's directive was still a violation. Mira herself stepped forward then. Her voice was clear and steady. If obeying the accord means surrendering our people to a foreign empire, then the accord is no longer a shield. It becomes a chain. I acted not to defy Korath, but to protect it. Her words carried across the chamber, and Dane could see the effect they had on the judges. This was more than legal defense. It was a statement of leadership. The judges announced a short recess to review the evidence. During the pause, Dane glanced toward the Korath delegation. Sareth's face was pale, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The king met Dane's gaze for a brief moment, and though he said nothing, the look held quiet gratitude. When the judges returned, the presiding judge stood. The chamber fell silent. This court recognizes the charges brought by the council of Korath, the judge began. However, the evidence shows that these charges were manufactured in service of an illegal agreement with the Dravic Empire. The court therefore rules the charges null and void. Princess Mira is cleared of all accusations. The sound of the gavel echoed through the dome. Relief washed over Dane, but he stayed composed. Mira bowed her head respectfully to the judges. Across the chamber, Sareth's expression hardened, but the king finally allowed himself a faint smile. The judge concluded, "Furthermore, the court recommends that the Interstellar Council review the conduct of the Korath High Council in light of this evidence. It was more than a victory. It was a blow to those who had tried to control Korath's future." As the session ended, the king stepped forward to meet his daughter. Though he could not speak during the trial, nothing now stopped him from placing a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was brief but full of meaning. Dane stood nearby, watching. He had done what he came to do. Yet he knew this was only the start. The Dravic would not forget this defeat, and the political balance in the galaxy had shifted. For now, though, justice had been served. The verdict had been announced hours ago, but the energy inside the Interstellar High Court station had not settled. News drones carried the story across the galaxy, broadcasting live footage of the trial, the evidence, and the final ruling. It was a moment that many hoped would mark a new chapter for justice and fairness among the stars. Dane stood in the main hall with Princess Mira and the King of Korath nearby. The hall buzzed with whispers from delegates, journalists, and diplomats from many worlds. People crowded around holoscreens replaying key moments of the trial. Mira looked tired, but determined. "They tried to silence me with fear and lies," she said softly. "But the truth has a power they cannot control." Dane nodded. "It will take time for that power to grow, but this is only the beginning." Already, Messages of support had arrived from planets who had watched the trial closely. Many admired the courage of a princess who put her people's freedom above her own safety. Others were alarmed at the secret deals exposed between the Council and the Dravic Empire. The Dravic representatives held private meetings in shadowed rooms, trying to calm their leaders and plan their next steps. They could not afford to lose the colonies they had hoped to gain, but the court's decision had shaken their plans deeply. Meanwhile, on Korath Prime, word of the trial spread quickly. Citizens gathered in public squares to watch the broadcasts. The story of the princess's fight became a symbol of resistance against corruption and secret powers. Back inside the court station, Dane met with several key diplomats who now saw Earth as a stronger ally. "Your actions helped expose a dangerous threat," one said. "We must stand together to protect freedom across the galaxy." But not everyone was pleased. Some members of the Korath High Council who had supported the conspiracy met in secret, plotting ways to regain influence. The power struggle on Korath was far from over. Despite this, the king had made a clear decision. He announced that the royal family would work openly with the Interstellar Council to ensure transparency and peace. His voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition, but also a new hope. Dane spent hours discussing future alliances with Mira and the king. "Your world faces many challenges," he said, "but together we can build something stronger." Mira smiled. "Thank you, Dane, for believing in me when no one else would." As the day ended, Dane found a quiet corner to review the evidence once more. The court's decision had been a victory, but he knew the true test would come with time. The Dravic Empire and their allies would not give up easily. Later that evening, Mira invited Dane to join her in a small garden inside the court station. The plants were strange but beautiful, glowing softly under the artificial light. "We have many battles ahead," she said. "Not just for Korath, but for all who value freedom." Dane looked out at the stars beyond the glass dome. "Then we fight together." The scene was calm, but both knew the galaxy was changing. Alliances would shift and new threats would rise. But for now, the truth had won. And in a universe filled with shadows, that truth was a powerful light.